Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another video annotation of the comic book history of comics. I am Fred Van Lente, your guide and writer and researcher and all that good stuff. Last time we did Chapter 1, The Funnies Get Famous, and today we've got for you our story on one of the other media that heavily influenced comics in the early ages, and that's the pulp magazines. The title of this story is Amazing Spicy Science Mystery Stories! Exclamation point. Around 1929, in the crime and poverty-infested Jewish ghetto of New York's Lower East Side, 12-year-old Jacob Jack Kurtzberg was dashing home to his family's tenement apartment on Suffolk Street in a torrential downpour. I spotted this magazine floating down the gutter and jumped for it, and saved it just before it washed into the sewer he'd remember as an adult. Some guy didn't want to be seen with it. On the cover was something I'd never seen before. The cover was amazing. Spaceships in futuristic cities. At that moment, something galvanized in my brain. Young Jack had fallen under the spell of the pulp magazine, the dominant form of mass genre prose fiction in America since 1896. In the same year as the birth of the comic strip, publisher Frank A. Munsey decided to cut costs by switching to newly invented high-speed printing presses and cheap, grimy pulp paper, declaring, "The story is worth more than the paper it is printed on." The inexpensive new process allowed Munsey to slash the cover price on his fiction magazines from a dime down to a nickel. The affordable format was a huge hit. Numerous publishers began cranking out pulp magazines at a prodigious rate in every conceivable genre. Each bi-monthly or quarterly issue was, on average, 128 pages, and featured one lead novel of 60,000 words, along with 20,000 words or so of backup short stories. The sheer volume of pulps, some 250 titles were on the stands at a given time, meant that over 200 million words of new fiction got cranked out every month. Though prose, the stories were heavily illustrated. Sexy damsels in distress, particularly in these soft-core porn, spicy pulps, were a big part of their appeal. But the science fiction pulp, including the one Jack rescued, was the near-exclusive purview of one Hugo Gernsback, a would-be inventor and immigrant from Luxembourg. "Calling all geeks and nerds! Come in, geeks and nerds! Destiny is calling!" Gernsback made the most of his money selling radio parts to the mail and popularizing amateur wireless as a hobby. Gernsback founded the first magazine dedicated solely to scientification. Solely to scientifiction. Try and say that 10 times fast. This magazine was called Amazing Stories, and it debuted in 1928 because he sincerely believed that in science fiction was to be found the guideposts to a better future in real life. The present order of civilization is highly unscientific, and when we contemplate our cycles of prosperity followed by cycles of abject depression, every thinking individual must come to the conclusion that we have failed somewhere. When people are starving in the midst of plenty, when for the first time in history of the human race it becomes possible for humanity to labor but a short fraction of its time and have leisure for a larger percentage of its time, then indeed we know that something must be done about it. The Great Depression had just settled like a burial shroud over America, and Gernsback's idealistic editorials in his SF mags struck a chord with many, many young people. This same year saw two pulp heroes leap from purple prose to the funnies page. Philip Nolan's Buck Rogers, who had just premiered the year before in Amazing Stories, and Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan, who first swung out of the jungle in Munsey's All Story in 1912. Both had comic strips begin about them on January 7th, 1929. Befitting their non-comedic subject matter, these new adventure strips also featured a more realistic illustration style of drawing from Richard Calkins and Hall Foster, respectively, influenced by pulp artists such as Gernsback's best, a former architect named Frank R. Paul. And just so you totally see what I'm talking about here, this is a very famous cover by Frank R. Paul from Amazing Stories, obviously depicting the H.G. Wells novel War of the Worlds. And if you want to then compare that to comic strips, here is Calkins doing Buck Rogers. These are the very first Buck Rogers comic strips, and for the first time in the comics pages, you really had illustrators that looked much more illustrative than cartoony. Here's a series of Paul's covers. This, in fact, right here, is Paul's cover for the issue in which Buck Rogers first appeared. In fact, this right here, this isn't by Paul, but no, excuse me, this is by Frank Paul. Excuse me. Fall 1929. This is Science Wonder Quarterly, and our best guess is this is the exact issue that Jack K. Kurtzberg, and you know who he really turns out to be. This is the actual pulp that young Jack pulled out of the sewer, and he was another artist that was a huge influence on Jack was Hal Foster, and if you compare and contrast Calkins and Buck Rogers, you see Foster was an even more impressive artist, and this is much more illustrative style than cartoony, and for that matter, there's no dialogue, right, or sound effects. Like, it's just there's actually literal narration going down there. Jack would later say that he became an artist instead of a writer because he couldn't spell. Inspired by Paul illustrated pulps and the adventure strips that spawned from them, he began drawing everywhere. Jack's parents encouraged artistic pursuits as an alternative to the endemic street gangs on the Lower East Side. The Jews fought the Irish, Jews from different blocks fought each other. The boys used anything handy as a weapon in those vicious brawls, including corn on the cob stolen from street vendors. Violence was such a part of Jack's early life that he later claimed he would take the subway to different neighborhoods and pick fights just to see what other kids' combat styles were like. Your uppercut is better than the kids in Brownsville, but your roundhouse needs work. I suggest sending time in the South Bronx. Overall, I rate Forest Hills a 6.5. The Kurtzbergs enrolled Jack in art classes at the legendary Educational Alliance, a free school that would also train painters Ben Shahn and Mark Rothko. Unfortunately, in his first class, he used up all the chalk before the other students had a chance to draw. Though Jack's astounding speed would later make him a legend, it got him kicked out of the Educational Alliance. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, another Gernsback devotee, graduating senior Jerry Siegel, peddled his homemade typed-up pulp magazine. In 1929, Siegel produced what historians believe to be the first fan magazine, or fanzine, but beyond trading it via mail with other Gernsbackians scattered across the country, nothing much came of it. Science Fiction's third issue contained a Siegel story entitled Reign of the Superman that had been heavily influenced by Philip Wiley's 1930 allegorical novel Gladiator. Though not really pulp, Wiley was an editor at The New Yorker. Gladiator tells the life story of a man from an isolated farm community who was injected in the womb by his scientist father with a serum that gives him the proportionate strength of an insect. Yes, really. Bullets bounce off him, he can outrun trains, he can leap over buildings. As a boy, his parents encourage him to pretend to be meek so regular people won't be scared of his strength. So he builds a fortress in the woods where he can find some solitude and be himself. Science Fiction was written entirely by Siegel under various pseudonyms and illustrated by classmate Joe Shuster, a shy, nearsighted, bodybuilding-obsessed transplant from Toronto he had met while working on the school newspaper. In Siegel's Reign of the Superman, a homeless man recruited from a breadline is subjected to a bioperfection process, then uses his vast psychic powers for world domination. The nations of the globe try to unite against him, but the Superman broadcasts thoughts of hate to make them turn on each other. Just so you can see a little bit more what I'm talking about. This is a first edition of Gladiator, the Philip Wiley novel, with its very kind of Lind Ward wood-blocky cover. The site I got this image off of was selling a first edition copy for almost $5,000. So kids, if you're listening to this and you can find this book in your stacks, maybe it's time to hit eBay. And this here is The Reign of the Superman as illustrated by Mr. Shuster and written by Jerry Siegel under the byline of Herbert S. Fine that appeared in this science fiction, this pulp that he self-published. But the Superman gets so out of hand that God himself finally has to take him out. If you just listened to me that God was dead, you wouldn't be in this mess. Obviously, the Superman was heavily influenced by his namesake, the superior being, or Übermensch, in the philosophy of Germany's Friedrich Nietzsche. Soon, even the inexpensive pulps began to feel the pinch of the Depression. Lesser firms went out of business, those that remained slashed titles. The reign of the Superman and Siegel's other science fiction stories earned him nothing but rejection slips from the struggling pulps. While in the Lower East Side, Ben, patriarch of the Kurtzberg clan, got laid off from his job in the immigrant rag trade. I know you're supposed to start Pratt in the fall, Jack, but now you got to get a job and help support the family. I'm sorry. Fortunately, however, the Kurtzbergs' early nurturing of Jack's artistic skills paid off. He quickly landed a job that could support the whole family at Times Square's Fleischer Studios. Dun dun dun! Tune in next time for Chapter 3 Toon Feud of the Comic Book History of Comics. And if you want to copy the book, you can get it right here from this retailer. I'm Fred Van Lente, and until next time, stay curious, gang.